We are going to hear from Matt Litzinger about why you may not need an accessibility specialist. So please welcome Matt.
Thank you very much. My talk is called Why You Might Not Need an Accessibility Specialist, and it's geared around practical best practices that you can implement as a small agency owner, as a designer, developer, or as a small business owner that's just looking to do more with accessibility. And if you've been paying attention to conversations in digital marketing, design, development, you know this is a topic that over the past couple of years has really rose in prominence. We see it just being talked about quite a bit. And I think that's a really good thing. I think elevating that is really helpful, that we're considering what does it look like to make the digital products and solutions that we have available to a broader audience, including people with disabilities. But it can also be overwhelming. There's certainly, when the word compliance is used, people's eyes either kind of gloss over or their heart rate starts to elevate. And so I want to try in this talk to help to make that simpler for us to understand, to make it not feel as unapproachable, and to make it feel like small steps that we make in terms of improvement for that can have big gains for our users or for our clients' users as well. And so my goal in this talk is to empower you with some practical knowledge that will help you to implement web accessibility across your own website or your client's sites. A little bit about me. I am the founder of Litz Digital, where I help growing organizations build highly capable websites using WordPress. I've been a WordPress developer since 2012, and I also have a web accessibility specialist certification through IAAP. You can find me in the following places. I post on LinkedIn a few times a week, and I like connecting with people there, so feel free to reach out there as well. And then I write a weekly mailing list geared around usability and accessibility tips, and I try to make those as bite-sized and easy to digest as possible. The quick wins part being that, like, I try to write it so that it's digestible in a minute or less for folks so that they can move on with their day. Today, we're going to break our talk down into just a couple questions and then just a little bit of strategy. First question being, what is web accessibility? I realize that as a room full of people this size, we probably come from varying different backgrounds. I'm sure some of us have a lot of experience with accessibility. Some of us, the term accessibility, we might understand it in our physical environment, but web accessibility might be something a little bit more foreign. And then also, why should small businesses care? This is a big conversation, and there's a lot of different strategies and ways that we can talk about, like, how do we make businesses care about that on more than just what does it look like because it's the morally right thing to do to care about including people with disabilities, but how do we make a business case for that? So we're going to look through some options for that. We're going to talk about a sustainable accessibility strategy that's more than just fixing technical bugs. And then we're going to look at what it looks like to fix today 4 common issues that don't require any code that can have really big impacts across your site. And then hopefully we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A as well. So I felt a little left out because a lot of the talks today have talked about AI, and my talk doesn't have hardly anything to do with AI, but I did seek ChatGPT's help in asking, can you give a definition of web accessibility that a non-technical person would easily understand, just so we can get a baseline for what that could look like. And the response was, web accessibility means making websites easy for everyone to use, including people with disabilities. Which, again, as I think we've heard in previous talks, ChatGPT, great research tool. I think this is a pretty good definition. I would expand it a little bit further to something more like this. So web accessibility gives users equal access to web content by making it easy to navigate, interact with, and understand regardless of their physical or cognitive abilities. I think this is a little bit more of an inclusive definition, and it also kind of teases out what does easy to use mean. That can take what's the form of device that they're using or assistive technology that they're using to access your content. How easy is it for them to scan and understand that content? So that gives us a pretty good baseline of what web accessibility is or how we might define it. As a agency or as a small business owner, the next logical question is, well, how do I make sure that I'm meeting the needs of users with disabilities? And so there's standards that exist that help us with that. Does anybody want to shout out what the standard is that's used to help, that we use to test for accessibility? WCAG, yes. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, some people call it WCAG, is a set of standards that was developed by the W3C to make the internet accessible for people with disabilities. This is 86 success criteria, which again can seem a little overwhelming. They break this down into 4 core principles, so perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And coming back to that definition of accessibility that I gave, one of the reasons I kind of broke that down into 3 areas maps onto how the W3C categorizes these success criteria as well. And then that robust one on the end is mostly centered around a forward-thinking approach to accessibility. What does it look like as assistive technologies develop over time? How do we support where the future's going with accessibility and make sure that our content's ready for that? The laws and regulations are based around WCAG, so this is a standard that's used to define what does accessible mean as it relates to the digital world. And this includes a lot of our US laws. So the ADA applies to state and local governments, private businesses. Section 508 also is relevant for federal agencies. And then if you're from Canada, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and the big hotness at the moment is the European Accessibility Act as well. These all cite, to one extent or another, WCAG as the standard that they're using when testing for accessibility. So why should small businesses care? There are a lot of implications as it relates to accessibility for small businesses, and we're going to take a look at just a few of those today. One of them is larger audience reach. I jumped ahead here. 1 in 4 people in the US, according to the CDC, lives with a disability. So if you think about this in terms of your audience, that means that 25% of your users possibly would have a disability that may impact their ability to access your content. 1 in 5 people are neurodivergent. So there are a whole list of the web content accessibility guidelines that are strictly around making your content easy to digest, easy to understand, and this helps people with neurodivergent conditions as well. And then accessibility supports an aging population. It also supports people with temporary impairments and even situational challenges. So if you think of things like if we step outside and are trying to look at our mobile phone in bright sunlight, or if you're only able to use one hand because you might be holding a bag of groceries or something. These are principles that can help people more easily use your site as well, even if you don't have a long-term disability. This chart is a really helpful resource that was developed by Microsoft and their Inclusive Design Toolkit. And it helps to understand this principle that I believe they also developed called solve for one, extend to many. So when we create solutions for people with disabilities, it has downstream effects that make our products more usable for everyone. And this chart helps to exemplify that. So we have 3 columns here of permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities or impairments. And then going across, we have different categories of what those disabilities might look like. So just to reference the top row here, we might have someone that doesn't have an arm and they only have one arm to use when interacting with a digital device. And then as a temporary disability, you might have somebody that recently broke an arm or has their arm in a sling and only has access to one arm. And a situational example of that might be a new parent that has a baby in one arm and again can only have use of one arm at that time. But you can see how if we solve the problem for someone that has the permanent disability, how that can have downstream effects of a lot of different people and make it a better user experience for everybody. There's also a SEO component. So a lot of accessibility best practices also, if you think of it like a Venn diagram, have a lot of crossover with SEO best practices. This includes things like semantic HTML, making sure that our images have alt text so that they can be scraped by search engines, making sure that our videos have transcripts and captions so that that's searchable as well. There's also a accessibility makes your pages less frustrating to use. And so a result of that is people end up spending more time interacting with your content or your site, and Google cares about that. So Google tracks things like the bounce rate of people leaving your site. And so it can help with ranking if people are spending more time on your page, and people will spend more time on your page if they're less frustrated with using it. It can also help enhance brand reputation. It shows that as a business you care about your users and all of your users and that you're committed to that. And it also communicates a certain level of professionalism. You'll notice that big companies like Amazon, like Google, these large corporations, they have a really large accessibility wing because it shows that they care about their users and they have this level of professionalism attached to that, and it's part of their reputation. And then obviously there's the reduced legal risk. This is kind of the elephant in the room, and it's certainly a major motivating factor for a lot of businesses, but it's one to mention for sure. Prioritizing accessibility is a great shield against legal action or demand letters. And so I'd be remiss not to mention that as well. There's a subset of this question that is, what are some of the reasons people don't handle accessibility? And they're not as nefarious in some cases as you might think. So I want to cover those for sure. One of them is lack of awareness. And I'm still surprised just in general conversations with how many people might not be aware of accessibility on the web or the need for it. Or even talking with clients where there might be a excuse of, well, we don't have users that are disabled, so we don't need to worry about that as a feature, which certainly isn't the case. There's a perceived cost and complexity that comes with accessibility. So if they are aware of the issue, something that has the word compliance attached to it, naturally people are going to think that costs a lot of money to solve that problem. And it can, certainly, for larger sites, but as I hope you'll know by the end of this talk, there's a lot of things that we can do for low cost or DIY that can really make a big impact. And then there might not be legal pressure yet. So some companies might decide to roll the dice and just say, well, we haven't been part of a lawsuit yet, so why fix something that's not broken? Which is kind of faulty logic, and I certainly wouldn't recommend this as a strategy. And then accessibility isn't part of the build process. As developers, we might think build process and think like a very like gulp or grunt or something, but when I say build process here, I mean it's not a integrated part of what your web build looks like. So it's not part of your design strategy, your development, all the way through the process. Your team members might not be up to speed on what the best practices are for their discipline. And then there's certainly DIY limitations as it relates to accessibility. So if you're using certain page builders or plugins or even embeds from third-party tools that are brought into your site, there's a good chance you don't have control over the underlying source code for that or can't change that easily, and you might have to do some kind of hacky things to make accessibility support on top of those platforms. And so that can certainly be a limiting factor in making changes for accessibility support. I mentioned it earlier in the agenda, but I want to talk about the sustainable accessibility strategy. Quite often we think about accessibility as a list of technical changes that we need to make so that we meet compliance. So like checkboxes that we need to mark so that we can say we're accessible. And that's a good place to start, but it's certainly not the whole picture. And I think if you're trying to create a culture of accessibility inside of your agency or your organization, it's important to zoom out and think a little bit bigger about that. And as I've kind of studied this, there's three components to that. There is the technology piece, which includes things like your CMS, your plugins, your theme code, even like your email templates. These are things we have to consider from a technology standpoint. There's people, so there's a training component to that, making sure that everyone on your team understands what accessibility best practices look like. It also looks like, how do you cast vision so that there's buy-in across your organization for accessibility? And then there's process too, which includes things like, how often are you doing site audits? What does it look like when you respond to a complaint that comes in about a lack of accessibility support? How do you have processes and procedures in place that help with those things that you're going to encounter related to accessibility? And then this is a chart that just kind of describes that. My apologies, I'm not a designer, so this is could probably be a better graphic. But the shaded area in the middle is kind of the sweet spot of, if you're doing all three of these things well, you have what's a well-formed, long-lasting strategy for accessibility. But you'll notice there's these gaps if you have 2 out of the 3. So for instance, if you're prioritizing technology and people but not process, you probably have like an inconsistent execution across your organization. You've got the buy-in, you've got the technical expertise, but as fires come up, you might not have consistent implementation with that. Same with people and process, but not technology. I call this the aspirational but ineffective. So you have the heart buy-in, but you just might not have the technical expertise in-house to help solve that. And then if you're prioritizing technology and process, but not people, you have a compliance without commitment. Your people within your organization aren't bought in on the vision of what it means to make sure that accessibility is a priority within your company. Okay, we're going to take a little bit of time to look at what it looks like to fix 4 common accessibility issues. And these are based on data from a survey that WebAIM does called the WebAIM 1 Million. They do this survey on an annual basis, and it surveys the top 1 million pages, home pages on the internet based on traffic using their Wave accessibility tool. And they're able to get some really great data around what the top issues are on those sites, especially from a longitudinal standpoint, because they've been doing this for so many years. They're able to see trends about that. And then it's also based on common issues from ADA lawsuits over the past 5 years. So all of these things that we'll look at today are high impact accessibility fixes that you can make yourself and with no programming skills required. The first one is images with missing or ambiguous alternative text. So as a rule for this fix, images need to have alt text that communicates the meaning or purpose of the image to the visually impaired user. This is important because if we think about encountering an image in the context of like an article, we can easily tell what that image, what's pictured in that image, and then what the context of it is in the image. But someone who's using a screen reader isn't going to be able to do that. If there's no alt text at all, the best case is that the screen reader will read them the name of the file. And as we all know from our best practices of naming files, that's probably not going to be very helpful. So alt text should describe the image within the overall context of the surrounding content. And I'll give an example of this here in a moment, just so that you can see. It's both describing what's in the image and then how what's in that image relates to the content on the page. Those are both important pieces. It shouldn't include phrases like image of or graphic of. Screen readers will announce the element on the page as it parses through the document. So it will say image, and you don't need to say image or graphic in your description, as it would be redundant. And then there does need to be an alt attribute on every image. So there's this breakdown of decorative images and then like content specific images. And even if it's a decorative image, that you don't think needs to be described in context, it still should have an alt attribute on the image so that it's semantically correct. So here's an example. I come from New Hampshire. Our big mountain up there is Mount Washington. So this is just a fun little homage. And we have 3 hikers in this image. So 3 male hikers at the summit of Mount Washington. And the alt text for this might look something like this. 3 male hikers standing on the summit of Mount Washington. So that's great. That's really descriptive of what's going on in this image. To add a little bit of flavor, if we imagine this image in the context of, say, like a local piece that's done for like a local newspaper site, this might be a group of 3 guys that got together after years apart and decided to do this goal that they always said that they had. So you might have Tom, Phil, and Joe climbing Mount Washington in 2025 because that might be relevant to that article. But we can also imagine this same image appearing on like the Appalachian Trail website and how the context of that might change because the people in the image aren't so much the subject as it is the location. So making sure to describe that in the right context could be helpful. I put this slide in my talk last night just after a conversation, and I think it's come up in a previous talk today as well. AI-powered tools are really good at adding generic alt text. So kind of as like a first pass across your site, if you have a lot of images, this can certainly be a helpful tool to utilize. But it's not great at capturing specific details. And there's an image that I like to use in these tools just as a kind of a case study and as an example to see how well they capture it. This is Bill Clinton. I think it's in 1997 at a county fair campaigning. And this is one of the more popular AI tools for alt text. The description that it gives here is a man in a blue shirt and jacket draped over his shoulders shakes hands with people in a large outdoor crowd. Technically accurate, and again, as a first pass, this probably would be helpful, but it certainly doesn't capture the complete context of this image. So just be wary. It's definitely a good tool to have, and as we know, like AI tools are only going to get better. I just don't think we're quite there yet. Second issue is links with non-descriptive text. So our rule for this would be links with vague descriptive text like learn more or download don't offer sufficient context for the user to determine what action will occur when clicking the link. One of the ways that screen readers allow the user to navigate through a page quickly is by links. So it will strip a lot of the other content out of the page and allow the user just to see a list of links. So you can imagine on something like a product category page in WooCommerce, if there are these tiles where there might be a heading and then the link or the button that just says learn more or like view all, you're just going to get a lot of those links in a row, which it would be confusing for the user. So being more descriptive about what will occur when the user clicks that link is much more helpful and minimizes confusion. There is a helpful class in WordPress too called Screen Reader Text that can be helpful in this case. So if we imagine a link, instead of saying learn more about our community programs, there's a way to hide the about our community programs visually while still making that available to the screen reader. And I'll show an example of that in a moment. This is different, bless you. This is different than like display none. So if you're familiar with that CSS property, display none will hide it across everything. So visually from screen readers, it will hide that completely. The screen reader text class, which is included in WordPress core, is a little bit different. It will hide it visually while still allowing screen readers to parse that. So here's an example of a product tile with a learn more link at the bottom. And in order to improve this, we might have that look something like this, where learn more is inside of the anchor tag, and then inside of a inline span tag, we have about the boomerang curved symbol boom stand, where there's a class applied to that span of screen reader text. And I know before anybody says anything, I know there's some code in here, but with the block editor in particular, and even like Elementor, we have the opportunity to add additional classes to things inside of our buttons.
What about link title? Can you add link title? Is
That's a great question. Yeah. So some screen readers do support the title attribute. It's not considered a consistent fix across the board, but you will see it a lot. There's a lot of times where the title is a little bit more verbose than the link text itself, but there are still some screen readers that don't support the title attribute. Yeah. So it's not a consistent fix. Insufficient color contrast. This, the rule for this is low contrast text is an issue because it can make content difficult to read, especially for people with vision impairments. And this is actually the reason that I got into accessibility work. I have color blindness, so I can't see the difference between blue, purple, red, green, and gray, pink. So it's very frustrating to look at low contrast text for me. And even things like, if you think of Slack and like the status icons, I can't tell like what those indicate when it's just like a little circle that's orange or green or red. It means nothing to me. So WCAG has some guidelines around how to approach contrast between a background color and a text color. For small text, which is 18 pixels or smaller, that contrast needs to be 4.5 to 1. For large text, which is considered larger than 18 pixels or 14 pixels with bold font weight, it needs to be 3.1. And for graphics or user interface components, which includes like icons, it's a 3-to-1 ratio as well. And ratios, I realize that the whole ratio thing is a little bit abstract. There are tools that help with this. So if you use Chrome as your browser, the dev tools in that have, if you look at the hex code in dev tools, it will also show you, if you click on the like color picker, it will show you the color contrast. Sometimes depending on how many layers back the text is from the background, if there's things in between that, it has a hard time distinguishing it, but it's a tool that you can use. Wave also has a dedicated tool where you can plug in 2 hex values if you know your background color and your text color. That's called their contrast checker. And then design tools like Figma have plugins that you can download as well that help to show what the contrast ratio is. Here's a couple just examples of what like display ads look like with low contrast text. So both of these, the text and the background behind it, don't pass the contrast ratio. And then there's also an example here of a before and after of a simple learn more button that doesn't pass on the left side, and then that darker color where after updated it passes. One conversation that you'll run into on Teams is a little bit of resistance from designers who don't want to change brand colors, especially if those brand colors are pretty established and they might be in print marketing material. There's a lot of, like, you can't make quick changes within large organizations around brand colors. So one thing that can be helpful is this concept of tints and shades. And the chart here on the screen describes that. So if we start at the right of this chart, this might be the brand color on the left, and then the top row, we're adding black to that color, and on the bottom, we're adding white to that color. So it gives us a lot of variations that we can use without changing the actual hue of the brand color itself to create some variations that allow us to have a better contrast ratio and still stay within the brand standards. And then the final issue that we'll take a look at is improper heading hierarchy. The rule here is headings are one of the primary methods used by screen readers to navigate content. Proper heading hierarchy makes it easier to skim content and find specific information on the page. Links are by far one of the highest ways that screen reader users will navigate, but headings is still a preference for some people, so it's an important consideration. Good heading hierarchy is also just a really good best practice from a SEO standpoint. And from a cognitive disability standpoint, it really helps to break up pages that have a lot of text with headings and to make sure that we're not skipping heading levels. So an example of that would just be if you have an H3 tag on a page, it should be preceded by an H2 heading. Like an H3 shouldn't show up if it doesn't have an H2 above that on the page. One of the biggest infractions in this area is that design or text styles are tied directly to the headings in CSS, not like a class that's then applied to that heading. So an example of this might be if you're familiar with the like eyebrow text concept on cards, or where there might be keywords up in an eyebrow text, something like that backpacking text would be applied with like an H6 style. So somebody might use an H6 heading level tag above what should probably be an H3 tag for that coast to coast headline, which is improper heading hierarchy because it's not using your proper outline structure. So a way to fix this would be we're not adding styles directly to the heading tags themselves. We're adding those styles to something like a H6 or a heading -6 class that then gets applied to the heading. You can also separate.
Would it be a paragraph instead of a heading?
Yes. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. It could be a span. It could be even a paragraph would probably be okay in that case. Yeah. But certainly not a like an H6 tag. Yeah.
It's hard because semantically that's not a paragraph. Semantically,
Correct.
that is a heading, and that's one of the challenges here.
Right, for SEO purposes, we might want it to be a heading.
Yeah, and because semantically it is. This is metadata that is heading related. This is not generic paragraph text, and that's one of the challenges with the strict hierarchy requirements that screen readers have, is that you have a lot of things that are, so if you have a figure in a book and you have consistently across figures have to have different headings because they have to be slaves to the hierarchy, even though across the board, as far as semantic importance, they all have the same level of semantic importance, but they'll be shown as having different levels of semantic importance because of the requirement to have this really, really strict hierarchy.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And it can be like, because it's like you mentioned, it's more keyword, it's more metadata. It could be a div as well. I think the important thing here is just the fact that styling should always be separate from the tag itself in this case, so that you have the flexibility to assign a text style to something other than that specific heading level tag. The block editor makes this pretty easy as well. So we have this typography block attribute that you can add to a heading tag or even a paragraph tag to change the text style to that. And that's independent from the heading or the heading level itself. So that's pretty useful in this case too. I recognize here as we kind of bring things to a close that this can be a little overwhelming. Some of you might be like rock stars at this already, but I just want to spend a couple minutes to just say this is certainly doable. Even if you're a team of one, even if you're a small team or a team just getting started thinking about accessibility, it's important to know that perfection isn't the goal here. There's no such thing as a perfectly accessible site. A lot of the more reputable accessibility companies actually don't even have what's like a certification to say your website is 100% accessible, because it might be today, but as we know, our sites are living ecosystems. Somebody might add a landing page with a form that doesn't have labels on it tomorrow, or add an article that doesn't have alt text on images, and that changes that compliance. So it's important to know that progress is the goal here, and even little changes make a big difference for your users. When they have disabilities, it can be the difference between them not having access to your product and you opening the door to them to allow them in. So it's really valuable. I have a couple of resources. This QR code or that link will both get you to these. We covered 4 issues today that are no-code fixes for accessibility. This checklist, the website accessibility checklist, offers 10 of those. Some of them need a little bit of code, but if you exhaust the 4 that we covered today and still want more, this checklist is really helpful for that. the web accessibility strategy worksheet, if you remember that Venn diagram that we had up of technology, people, and process, it just helps you to set, is anybody familiar with SMART goals? So like goals that are actionable, time-oriented, specific. They're these type of goals. And this worksheet helps you to set those around each of those 3 categories and think about what does that look like for you in the next 3 to 6 months in your organization. And then I have my slides available on this page as well. So both of those will take you to a landing page on my site where you can download or access those resources. So thank you. We'll take a little bit of time for questions, and then if you have questions after the fact, or if you're an introvert and don't want to ask questions out loud, feel free to email me or connect with me up here as well. Go ahead.
I have a question about video transcripts. Often we embed YouTube videos on pages with content that don't exactly match the transcript of what is said in the video. When you say that transcripts should be kind of attached to the video somehow, including closed captioning does not equal that, or does that kind of take away the need to provide a transcript if you have closed captions included on the video? And if you do need a transcript on the page, I just heard that some accordion blocks are not scannable by Google for SEO purposes, so are they scannable by screen readers?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. So the one about video with transcripts and captions, both of those, because they're in a text format, should be accessible. It's just a matter of where they're added to the video. So if that video is directly on your site, the video element allows you to source what file you're using for the transcription on that. If it's YouTube, I haven't checked it recently, but they should make that so that it's crawlable, so that they have the text available for the YouTube video. And then with accordions, it's this whole concept of for scraping those, the scrapers aren't really great at state of the page. So like they load the page in the initial state of it, they can scan that really well. But again, if things are hidden, like with display none, which a lot of accordions will be, it's not going to be able to see that content unless that accordion is expanded by default. Yeah.
So
there-
accordions are not accessible for the most part.
most of the ones you would see in the wild are not. There are certainly ways to make it accessible, yeah.
Okay.
So there are ways to visually hide things, again, like the screen reader helper text. There's ARIA attributes that help to show what the state of the accordions are, whether it's collapsed or not. And there's ways to make sure that that content's still accessible where it's not using display none, where a crawler can't reach that content.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
When adding the alt text, which is the better mistake to make? Not adding enough and keeping it efficient, or adding too much and being thorough?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the recommendation tends to be 1 to 2 sentences is kind of the max for alt text. There's not a stated max character limit on alt text. That being said, you can also put like an image of a chart up, and I wouldn't recommend fully describing that chart in alt text. There's another attribute on images you can add called long description, which will reference an ID of a different element, like a paragraph, or even like a hidden element, like a visually hidden element, where you can describe that much more in depth.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
The decorative images that you said that
Mhm.
also need alt text, the fact that they all do, may apply on multiple pages of the site. But you said that alt text should make sense with the context of the page as well. So how do we walk that line?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say with descriptive images, you wouldn't have to worry about that because the context it's irrelevant regardless of what page it's on. Yeah.
What do you use to like test out a website for accessibility?
Yeah, good question. So what do I use to test out websites for accessibility? I didn't cover tooling in this talk at all, but I do use a lot of like automated tools. So Wave is a great one. Axe has a DevTools extension that you can add that's really helpful, that scans your whole page. It even has, if you subscribe to their premium plugin, they have like guided audits that they can walk you through, which is helpful.
Okay.
There are more comprehensive, like site-wide ones where they can scan your sitemap and surface issues. The biggest thing I've run into with that is there always has to be this coupling of automated testing and manual testing, because at least as of today, automated testing can't really capture more than 30 to 40% of WCAG's issues, and it can't fully test any of them. There needs to be a human component in making sure that you can say that this is fully accessible. It can scan the HTML, it can even do some interactive pieces of that to test it, but it can't fully say that they're WCAG compliant.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
What would be the human component if you didn't have access to someone that actually used a screen reader or someone that had these kinds of needs?
Yeah. I'll say two things about that. Depending, are you a Mac or a Windows user?
Windows.
Okay. So NVIDIA is a free screen reader that you can install on Windows. It might be worth looking up how to use that. I know VoiceOver for Mac is also pretty easy to get started with, so it's a good place to start just as a gut check. I also am a really big advocate of real user testing, and I think even locally, like if you were to reach out to your like Association for the Blind or disability advocacy groups within your area, people are willing to help you test your products for a pretty reasonable cost. And I found that to be the case. And getting real user testing is incredibly useful. Yeah. One in the back.
I'm sorry to be the comment, not a question kind of person, but maybe you could take it and jump off on it. But we have done testing at Penske Media with alt text, and our research shows that images with alt text galleries that we have with alt text tend to perform a lot better. So that has been baked into our best practices.
When you
So
say
we have-
perform better, can you be specific about
From a
that?
traffic perspective,
Yeah.
ranking, right? So we get good ranking. We measured. This was a couple years ago, but we measured positional ranking, impressions from Google Search Console to the pages that we've added extensive alt text to. So it is a core part of our SEO strategy and our accessibility strategy.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your attention.